The beauty of the forbidden woman. Once upon a time, in the prosperous village of Duru, there lived a woman so breathtakingly beautiful that men forgot themselves in her presence. Adanna was her name, and she was unlike any other. Her skin was smooth as polished ebony, glowing under the sun like the deep river waters at dawn. Her eyes, wide and piercing, held the mysteries of the moon, and her smile, her smile, was said to soften even the hardest of hearts. When she walked through the village, men stumbled, women whispered, and children stared in awe. But Adanna was no ordinary beauty. She carried a secret, a dark truth buried deep within her that no one, not even she herself, fully understood. The woman no man could touch. Many men sought her hand. They came with gifts of gold, rare fabrics, and even livestock, hoping to win her heart. But Adanna never allowed any man to touch her before marriage. No touching before marriage, she would say with a sweet smile, her voice smooth like palm wine. Some called it virtue, others called it pride, but Adanna knew the truth. Her mother had warned her before she died. "My daughter," her mother had whispered one fateful night, as she lay on her sickbed, her once strong hands trembling. "Never let a man see what lies beneath your cloth, or his fate will be sealed." Adanna had been too young to understand at the time, but she never forgot those words. They echoed in her mind, a constant reminder that she was not like the other women. Her beauty was both a gift and a curse. The men who desired her, men from far and wide, spoke her name in hushed voices. Some believed she was a goddess in human form, while others thought her beauty was a trick of the spirits. Traders would forget their prices when she passed through the market, warriors would drop their weapons just to catch a glimpse of her, and even the village elders, men who had seen many seasons, shook their heads in disbelief. "This kind of beauty is dangerous," they murmured. Women both admired and feared her. Mothers warned their sons not to fall for her charm, for it was said that any man who married her would never be the same again. But still, men pursued her. One by one, they approached her father, Chief Okafor, offering great riches in exchange for her hand. But Adanna refused them all. Until one man came along. The man who would not give up. His name was Obi, a simple but kind-hearted hunter. Unlike the others, he did not chase Adanna with flattery or gifts. He did not boast of his wealth or strength. Instead, he watched her from afar, admiring her not just for her beauty, but for her mind and spirit. One day, as she walked to the river to fetch water, Obi followed. He did not call out to her, nor did he try to impress her. He simply waited until she finished filling her clay pot and then stepped forward. "Adanna," he said softly. She turned, her heart skipping a beat. Unlike the others, his eyes held no hunger, only quiet admiration. "Why do you refuse all men?" he asked, tilting his head curiously. She hesitated before answering. "Because marriage is not something to rush into." He smiled. "Then let me not rush. Let me simply stand beside you until you are ready." Something in his voice made her chest tighten. She had heard many men speak sweet words, but this felt different. For months, Obi did not pressure her. He simply walked with her, spoke with her, and treated her as a person, not a prize. And slowly, her walls began to crumble. One day, she turned to him and said softly, maybe I could be your wife." Obi's heart leaped. The wedding that changed everything. The village erupted in celebration. Drummers played until their hands ached, dancers moved their bodies until sweat glistened on their skin, and children sang songs about Adanna, the untouchable beauty, finally finding a husband. Chief Okafor, though wary, gave his blessing. "You are a good man, Obi," he said. "Take care of her." But as the sun set on the grandest wedding the village had ever seen, Adanna's heart filled with dread. She knew that tonight, her secret would be exposed. She had never allowed any man to touch her. Not once. But tonight, there would be no escape. The moment of truth. When the celebrations ended, the last torch was extinguished, and the village fell silent. Adanna found herself alone with her husband. Obi took her hands gently. "Do not be afraid, my love," he whispered. But her hands trembled. "Maybe we should sleep first, we are tired," she murmured, stepping back. Obi laughed softly. "Sleep. My wife, I have waited for this night. I will love you gently." Adanna swallowed hard. She had no choice but to reveal the truth. With a shaking breath, she slowly removed her clothes. The moment Obi's eyes fell upon what lay between her thighs, he let out a blood-curdling scream. His body stiffened. His legs gave out. His hands clutched at his face. My eyes, he wailed, staggering back. The entire village awoke to his cries. People rushed to their huts, elders, women, even the children. "What has happened?" they cried. But Obi could not answer. He clutched his face in horror, his world turned to darkness. And just like that, he was blind. The beginning of the curse. Adanna stood frozen, watching as her new husband wailed like a wounded beast. The villagers stared at her with fear and suspicion. "This is no ordinary woman," someone whispered. "She is cursed," another hissed. But no one knew the truth. No one knew that this was only the beginning. Because fate was not done with Adanna yet. The first husband's curse. The night air in Duru village had never carried such terror. People crowded outside Obi's hut, their voices rising in confusion and fear. The once joyous wedding feast had turned into a night of screams and whispers. Inside, Obi knelt on the floor, clutching his face, his body shaking like a leaf in the wind. My eyes, I cannot see." The village chiefs, elders, and healers rushed inside. Some lit torches, their flickering flames casting long, uneasy shadows on the walls. Adanna stood frozen, trembling. The truth had been revealed. Her mother's warning echoed in her mind. Never let a man see what lies beneath, or his fate will be sealed. And now, Obi, her husband, was blind. The elders' judgment. The healers tried everything. They burned special herbs, they washed Obi's face with sacred river water, they chanted ancient prayers. Nothing worked. His eyes, once filled with love and life, stared blankly into darkness. "This is not an illness," the chief elder finally declared. "This is something unnatural." His gaze shifted to Adanna. "What did you do to him?" Gasps filled the hut. All eyes turned to Adanna, the untouchable beauty. "I did nothing," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Lies," someone shouted from outside. "First, she refuses all men. Now, the one who marries her loses his sight," another voice hissed. Fear turned into anger. The villagers wanted answers. Adanna's father speaks. Chief Okafor, Adanna's father, stepped forward. He had been silent through the chaos, but now his face was grim and full of disappointment. "Daughter," he said, his voice heavy. "Tell the truth. What is it that you hide?" Adanna's breath hitched. She could not tell them. She did not even understand it herself. "I swear, I do not know," she whispered. I have never let a man touch me before." More murmurs. More suspicion. "Then why does your husband suffer?" an elder pressed. Adanna had no answer. "A decision is made." The elders whispered among themselves. The village waited. Finally, the chief elder raised his hand. "We do not know the cause of this calamity, but we cannot risk another. Obi was a strong man, yet in one night, he is blind. What if another man suffers worse?" He looked at Chief Okafor. "She cannot stay here. She must leave." Adanna's heart stopped. No, she gasped. I have done nothing wrong. But the decision had been made. Her father did not argue. He did not fight for her. The elders have spoken, he said. You must go. Adanna felt her chest tighten. The very people who had once praised her beauty, who had celebrated her wedding, who had danced in her honor, were now the same ones turning their backs on her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She would not break. A lonely departure. Before the sun rose, Adanna was forced to pack her things. She looked one last time at the village, the only home she had ever known. She had been adored, envied, feared, but now rejected. No one dared to speak to her. Not even Obi. The man who had once promised to protect her did not call out her name as she walked away. And so, Adanna left Duru village, alone. She did not know where she would go. She did not know if she would ever find a place to call home again. But one thing she knew for certain, this was only the beginning. Because fate was not done with her yet. The wealthy suitor and his doom. The night air was cold as Adanna walked away from Duru, carrying nothing but a small bundle of belongings and the crushing weight of exile. She did not weep. Tears would not change the past. She had loved once, she had trusted once, and now she was cursed forever. Her mother's warning had come true. Never let a man see what lies beneath, or his fate will be sealed. The words haunted her. But was it truly a curse? Or something worse? She did not understand what she was. She only knew that every man who sought her would suffer. And yet, the world was vast. Perhaps, somewhere, there was a place where she could start anew. A new village, a new hope. After many days of walking, Adanna arrived in a bustling marketplace in the village of Yumis. It was nothing like Duru. The people did not know her. The traders called out prices, the scent of roasted meat and palm wine filled the air, and children ran barefoot across the dusty paths. Here, she was no longer the cursed one. She was simply a stranger. Adanna found work at a weaving shop, earning enough to buy food and a place to sleep. She kept her head low. She spoke little. And for a time, she was safe. Until he saw her. The arrival of Ikin. Ikin was the wealthiest man in Yumis. His family owned the largest farmlands, his father was a chief, and his mother came from a long line of traders. Women in the village dreamed of being his wife. But when Ikin saw Adanna, his words stopped. Who is that woman? He asked his friend at the market. His friend hesitated. She is new here. She works at the weaver's shop. Ikin's lips curled into a confident smile. Then she does not know who I am. Ikin had never been rejected before. Why would this be any different? The chase begins. Ikin sent gifts, fabrics from distant lands, gold bracelets, baskets of ripe fruit. He built a house for her before she even agreed to marry him. But when he spoke to her, she smiled softly and said, "No touching before marriage." A woman of virtue, he laughed. Perfect. His desire only grew. He was determined to make her his. And Adanna, seeing no way to refuse him forever, eventually agreed. Perhaps this time, things would be different. The grandest wedding. The wedding of Ikin and Adanna was the largest the village had ever seen. Hundreds of guests came, dressed in their finest garments. Drums echoed into the sky, palm wine flowed freely, and warriors performed dances in their honor. Even the king sent gifts. "You are the luckiest man in all the land," an elder told Ikin. Ikin only smiled. Luck had nothing to do with it. He had won. Or so he thought. The wedding night, the curse strikes again. That night, Ikin led Adanna to the most lavish hut in the village. The room was filled with flower petals, candles casting golden shadows on the walls. He reached for her hand. You are mine now, my love, he whispered. Adanna's heart thumped violently. Please, Ikin, she said softly, stepping back. Perhaps we should rest first. Ikin laughed, cupping her face. You are shy, he whispered. Do not worry. I will love you gently. Adanna swallowed hard. There was no escape. Slowly, hesitantly, she removed her clothes. Ikin's eyes roamed over her until they fell upon what lay between her thighs. Then, silence. His smile vanished. His breath caught in his throat. His hands trembled. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His voice was gone. The mute groom. Ikin stumbled backward, clutching his throat. Speak. Adanna cried, her voice shaking. He opened his mouth again, but no words came. The room was deathly quiet. Then, panic filled his eyes. He tried to scream. Nothing. He slammed his fist against the wall. Still, nothing. He had lost his voice. Forever. The village wakes. Ikin burst from the hut, his body shaking with horror. His family, still drinking and celebrating, saw him and rushed forward. What is wrong, my son? His father asked. Ikin pointed at his throat, his mouth opening and closing like a dying fish. He has lost his voice, someone shouted. Gasps filled the air. The elders gathered, muttering among themselves. Then, their eyes turned to Adanna. Just like before. Just like in Duru. First, one man goes blind. Now, another man loses his voice. This is no coincidence, a voice growled. The whispers of a curse spread like wildfire. And Adanna knew she would not be safe here either. The curse spreads. Ikin's family took him to healers, priests, even the oracle of the hills. But his voice never returned. His wealth, his power, all of it meant nothing now. A man who could not speak, could not rule, could not lead, could not command. And Adanna? She had nowhere left to run. The village watched her with fear, suspicion, and anger. She is cursed. She must leave. She is not one of us. The fall of Adanna. Adanna did not fight the accusations. She had seen this before. She gathered her few belongings and walked away. Another village lost. Another home abandoned. And in the distance, as she disappeared into the night, the whispers followed her. Wherever she goes, misfortune follows. But fate was not finished with her yet. Because the next man she would meet would not be like the others. And his fate would be far, far worse. The third man and the ultimate revelation. The night wind whispered through the trees as Adanna walked alone once more, her bare feet pressing into the damp earth. She had fled 2 villages. 2 husbands had suffered at her hands. One had lost his sight. One had lost his voice. And she had lost everything. She could no longer fool herself. She was not normal. Whatever lived inside her was not of this world. And yet, she still did not understand it. What had her mother meant by never let a man see what lies beneath? What was she? She would soon find out. And the man who would reveal the truth to her would pay the ultimate price. A city of power and darkness. Days turned to weeks. The road was long, and the hunger in her belly was relentless. But then, in the distance, she saw it. A city unlike any she had ever known, Obinna, the land of iron and gold. Towering walls surrounded it, carved with strange symbols. Smoke poured into the sky from the many forges, and the streets pulsed with life. Here, kings were born and warriors were made. And at the heart of it all was Obinna, the city's most feared and powerful man. A man whose name alone sent shivers through the spines of lesser men. A man who had never known fear. the king of iron and gold. Obinna was not just rich, he was dangerous. He owned lands, slaves, warriors, and the most powerful trading routes in the region. His enemies died whispering his name. His friends feared him more than they loved him. And yet, when he saw Adanna, his heart thundered. She was unlike the women who threw themselves at his feet. She did not lower her eyes. She did not cower. And that made him want her more than anything. "Who is she?" he demanded. His servant bowed. "A wanderer, my lord. She arrived today." Obinna smiled. "Not for long. A dangerous game." Unlike the others, Obinna did not chase Adanna with gifts. He did not send gold, or fabrics, or slaves. He sent a single message. "Come to my house. I wish to see you." She did not go. Days passed. Another message arrived. "Come to my house. I will not ask again." Still, she did not go. She had been down this road before. But Obinna was not a man who accepted rejection. If she would not come to him, he would go to her. A shadow in the night. The night was silent. Adanna sat in her small rented room, staring at the flickering flame of a candle. She was tired. Tired of running. Tired of carrying a secret she did not understand. A soft breeze brushed against her skin. She turned, and there he was. Obinna stood in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the moonlight. "You did not come to me," he said simply. Adanna's breath hitched. "I did not ask to see you," she replied. Obinna smiled. "That is where we disagree." The third wedding. Obinna was not a man who courted or begged. Within a week, he declared his intention to marry Adanna. No one dared to question him. The wedding was a spectacle. More gold was spent than the king himself had seen in a year. But to Adanna, it meant nothing. Because she knew what was coming. And so did fate. The night that changed everything. The grand celebrations ended. The torches burned low. And once again, Adanna stood in a room with her new husband, knowing that disaster was moments away. Obinna ran a hand down her arm. "You are mine now, my love." Her body stiffened. "Maybe we should rest first," she began. He chuckled darkly. "Rest? No, my queen, tonight we claim what is ours." She swallowed hard. No escape. Slowly, hesitantly, she removed her clothes. Obinna's smirk remained until he saw what lay between her thighs. Then, something happened that had never happened before. His eyes did not widen in fear. His voice did not vanish. Instead, he froze. And then, he laughed. The horrific truth. Adanna shivered. No man had ever laughed. "I see it now," Obinna whispered, stepping forward. She stumbled back. "You think you carry a curse," he murmured, tilting his head. "But it is not a curse, Adanna. It is a gift." Her blood ran cold. What do you mean?" His smile grew. "You do not know, do you?" Her heart pounded. "What am I?" she whispered. Obinna's eyes glowed with dark amusement. "You were never meant to belong to men." His voice lowered. "You were meant to consume them." Her stomach turned. "You are lying." "Am I?" He chuckled. "Tell me, Adanna, why do men suffer when they see you?" She had no answer. "Why do you run? Why do you fear what is inside you?" She shook her head violently. No, I am not a predator," he whispered. "Oh, but you are, my love. And it is time you embrace it." Something in her snapped. Her breath quickened. Her body felt hot. Alive. She felt something inside her awaken. And in that moment, Obinna smiled. Because he had won. But he did not realize. He was already dead. The beast awakens. Something shifted inside Adanna. A hunger. A darkness. A power she had never felt before. Her eyes darkened. Her lips parted. And for the first time in her life, she smiled. The beast within. The room stood still. Obinna smiled, his eyes gleaming like the reflection of fire on a polished blade. You were never meant for them, he whispered. Adanna's breath came in ragged gasps. Something inside her stirred, deep in the marrow of her bones, like a beast waking from a centuries-long slumber. She had spent her life running, hiding, fearing. But now, for the first time, she felt something else. A thrill. A hunger. And it terrified her. No, she whispered. Yes, Obinna corrected. And the best part. You have no idea what you truly are. He reached for her again. And this time, her body moved on its own. A blur of motion. A sharp intake of breath. And then, his wrist was in her grip. Tightly. Painfully. His smirk faltered. Good, he breathed. You feel it now, don't you? Her fingernails dug into his skin. Her breath came faster. She felt something clawing at the inside of her chest. Not fear. Not horror. But power. A power she had never known. And in the golden flicker of candlelight, Obinna finally saw it. A darkness in her eyes. Not like the deep pools of moonlit water that had once mesmerized men. No. This was something ancient. Something predatory. And for the first time in his life he hesitated. The predator and the prey. You wanted this. Adanna whispered. Her voice was different now. Lower. Richer. Obinna shivered. He didn't know why. Yes, he said, forcing a grin. But his confidence was cracking. She could see it in the way his paws fluttered at his throat. Then take it. She twisted his wrist. He gasped. His knees buckled. His free hand clawed at her arm, trying to pry himself free. But it was no use. His strength, his famed power, was nothing against her. And Adanna. She felt it. For the first time, she was not the prey. She was the hunter. A slow, wicked smile spread across her lips. A change begins. Obinna tried to speak. Tried to command her. Tried to threaten. But his throat locked. His words turned to dust. His heart slammed against his ribs. Something was happening. Something terrible. His body began to shake. His vision blurred. And Adanna knew she had not even touched him in the way that had cursed the others. This was different. This was coming from within her. What have you done? He gasped. Adanna stepped closer, pressing him against the wall. I don't know, she murmured. And that was the truth. She did not understand it. She only knew she liked it. The feeling of his paws racing under her fingertips. The way his smile had crumbled into fear. The way his entire body had surrendered to her presence. A lifetime of running, of exile, of shame. And now she had control. She had power. And she was going to use it. Obinna's fate. He struggled to breathe. The air felt heavier in his lungs, like water filling a drowning man. His vision darkened at the edges. He was losing himself. Please, he croaked. Adanna laughed. The sound echoed in the candlelit room. Rich. Full. Alive. She had feared this for so long. But now, she welcomed it. She leaned in, her lips grazing his ear. You wanted to own me, she whispered. But I am not something to be owned. His knees gave out. He slumped forward. And then, with one last, shuddering breath, Obinna collapsed. Limp. Still. Silent. The awakening. Adanna let his body fall to the floor. She did not tremble. She did not weep. She did not run. Instead, she stared at her hands. They no longer felt like her own. Something inside her had changed. A shift. A breaking. And as she stood over the lifeless form of the most feared man in Obianwu, she knew. She would never be weak again. She would never bow again. She would never run again. Because Adanna had finally become what she was meant to be. A creature of hunger. A force beyond human understanding. She was no longer a woman with a curse. She was the curse itself. And the world was about to know her name. The curse that was never a curse. Obinna lay motionless on the cold floor. His once mighty body, a temple of strength, wealth, and arrogance, was now a fragile, breathless shell. Adanna stared down at him, heart pounding. She felt no fear. No guilt. No regret. For the first time in her life, she felt whole. She had spent years running from her truth, believing herself to be cursed, believing she was a danger to those who came too close. But now, she knew the truth. This was never a curse. This was who she was always meant to be. The awakening. A slow, familiar warmth spread through her body. She had felt it before, the night Obi lost his sight. The night Ikin lost his voice. But this time, it was stronger. It did not come as a warning. It came as a revelation. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. And then, she heard it. A voice. Soft, whispering, calling around her ears like the wind. You are ready now. Adanna's eyes snapped open. The room blurred. The walls rippled like water. The air grew heavy with something ancient, something that had been waiting, watching, since the moment of her birth. Who are you? She whispered. The voice laughed. Who are you? It echoed. And suddenly, Adanna saw everything. The memory that was never hers. She was no longer in the room. She was somewhere else. Somewhere far older than time itself. The air smelled of fire and earth, of blood and salt. The sky was not blue, nor black, nor any color she could name. And before her, standing on the edge of nothingness, was a woman. No, not a woman. Something more. Her face was familiar, yet unfamiliar. Her eyes glowed like embers, shifting between deep brown and endless gold. Her lips curved in amusement, as if she had been expecting this moment. You have lived believing you were cursed, the woman said. That what lies between your thighs is a punishment. Adanna shivered. But you were never cursed, child. The woman stepped forward. You are not a mistake. You are not an accident. You are not even human. Adanna felt her breath catch. Then, what am I? She whispered. The woman smiled. You are the last of us. The forgotten ones. Visions flashed before her. A civilization long erased from history. Women like her, but not like her. They were warriors, leaders, rulers, not wives, not mothers, not objects to be owned. They walked among men, but they were feared. Worshipped. Desired, but never controlled. They were not just women. They were devourers. Men believe they rule the world, the voice continued. But they do not know that once, there was another force, one that even they could not tame. Adanna's mind reeled. Her very existence was proof of something ancient. Something men had tried to erase. They called us demons. Witches. Curses upon the land. But we were never monsters. We were simply free. Adanna felt her body tremble. She was not alone. She had never been alone. She was a remnant of a world that had been destroyed. A survivor. A goddess reborn. The final choice. The vision faded. Adanna was back in the room. Obinna's lifeless form lay at her feet. The weight of centuries pressed down on her shoulders. She had spent her entire life fighting against what she was. Running. Hiding. But not anymore. She would no longer be the hunted. She would be the hunter. She would no longer fear men. Men would fear her. The transformation. Adanna breathed deeply. Her skin glowed faintly in the candlelight. Her veins pulsed with something new, something ancient, something powerful. She was no longer just a woman. She was a force. A reminder of a past men had tried to bury. And she would never be buried again. The door to the room burst open. Guards rushed in, weapons drawn. "My lord," one of them cried, staring in horror at Obinna's still form. Then, their eyes turned to Adanna. But they did not see a grieving widow. They did not see a frightened woman. They saw something else. Something they could not explain. Something they could not fight. And for the first time in their lives, warriors trembled before a woman. A new beginning. Adanna smiled. It was not a smile of malice. It was a smile of freedom. "Your lord is dead," she said simply. The guards hesitated, unsure whether to attack or bow. Because they knew. Deep down, they knew. They were standing before something beyond them. Something older than their weapons. Something stronger than their fear. "Tell your people," Adanna continued. "The world is changing." She stepped forward. And the guards stepped back. Because in their bones, they understood. They were not in control anymore. Adanna had spent her life running. Now, she would rise. She was not the cursed one. She was the beginning of something new. And the world was not ready for her. The rise of the devourer. The guards did not move. Their hands gripped their weapons, but their fingers trembled. They had rushed into the room expecting to see a grieving widow. Instead, they found something else. Something unlike anything they had ever known. A woman who did not cower. A woman who did not fear. A woman who had killed the most powerful man in Obinna without lifting a single blade. The torches flickered in the dim chamber, and in the golden light, Adanna stood calm and unshaken. "Your lord is dead," she said again, voice steady. "And your city belongs to me." The city holds its breath. Obinna had never been silent before. It was a city of fire and metal, of warriors and kings, of men who conquered and took what they wanted. But now, as word of Obinna's death spread through the streets, the people whispered. "A woman killed him." No, not a woman, a monster. She did not touch him, and yet, he fell. Fear seeped into the cracks of power. Men who once ruled with an iron grip felt their fingers loosen. And deep in the palace, the council of warlords gathered. "We must kill her," one hissed, slamming his fist on the table. "We must burn her," another whispered, eyes wide with terror. "What if she cannot die?" a third voice said softly. And that was the question that none of them dared answer. A throne of her own. Adanna did not flee. She did not run from their whispers. She sat upon Obinna's throne, her legs crossed, her eyes burning with something ancient. The city expected her to plead for her life. To weep. To beg. Instead, she smiled. "You have spent centuries making women small," she murmured, staring at the warlords before her. "You have broken them, bought them, thrown them away when they no longer pleased you." Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The men listened because they had no choice. "I have seen your kind before," she continued. I have lived under your rule. But that ends today. One of the warlords, a beast of a man with scars like rivers across his chest, stepped forward. You think you can rule us, Ispat? Adanna simply tilted her head. I do not think, she said. I know. His face twisted in fury. He reached for his sword. And then, his body stiffened. His eyes widened in horror. His hand trembled on the hilt of his blade. And just like that, his breath stopped. The warlords watched in terror as he collapsed before her feet. He did not bleed. He did not cry out. He simply ceased. The air grew thick with silence. Adanna stood, stepping over the fallen man. You wanted kings, she whispered, voice like a blade against silk. Then kneel. And one by one, the warlords fell to their knees. The return of the forgotten ones. For centuries, women had been kept in chains. Told they were weak. Told they must be protected, controlled, owned. But the truth was buried beneath the ruins of time. There had been another era before this. An era where women like Adanna were worshipped, not feared. And now, that era would return. From the shadows, others like her began to emerge. Women who had felt the call in their bones. Women who had lived in silence, waiting. And one by one, they came to Obinna. To kneel before her throne. And to rise as something greater. The final whisper. The world would never be the same. Men whispered of a new age. An age where women did not bow. An age where power shifted like the winds of a coming storm. And at the center of it all, Adanna sat upon her throne. No longer the haunted. No longer the cursed. But the beginning of a legend. A legend that men would fear. A legend that women would follow. And in the deepest corners of the world, where even kings did not dare step, a voice whispered her name. She has returned. The devourer walks among us again. And this time, she will not be stopped.